Liana Okoro had just come home from university for her semester break. At 20, she hoped being home would bring comfort, maybe some peace after months of hard study. But the moment she stepped through the door of their house in Ibadan, she felt the same heavy air she'd left behind. Nothing had changed. Her father, Mr. Okoro, a retired military officer, still ran the home like it was his command post. Strict rules, no questions, no softness. Her mother, Ngozi, stayed quiet, always trying to avoid conflict, always trying to keep the house calm. Liana tried to blend in, helping where she could, smiling when expected, keeping her dreams to herself. She wanted to study abroad, to build a life far from all the shouting and control. But her father always dismissed her dreams. "You'll stay here and learn respect," he'd say, as if ambition were a form of disobedience. One evening, after a long family gathering, Liana was exhausted. Guests had eaten, laughed, and left behind mountains of dirty dishes. She had helped since morning, cooking, serving, cleaning, and all she wanted was to rest. But her father looked at her and barked, "Go wash those plates before you sleep." Her voice came out soft, almost pleading. "Dad, I'll do it in the morning." That single sentence was enough. His face tightened, his eyes darkened. "What did you just say?" he thundered, rising from his chair. Liana froze. Her mother's spoon clattered in the sink. In that split second, the peace she'd wished for shattered completely, and the storm she'd feared for years was finally about to begin. Mr. Okoro's voice exploded through the living room like thunder. "You live under my roof, and you dare talk back to me?" His words cut through the air, sharp and heavy. Liana stood near the doorway, her hands shaking, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't even been rude. All she'd said was that she would wash the dishes in the morning. But to her father, that sounded like rebellion. "Dad, please," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean any." Before she could finish, he stepped closer, his face red with anger. "You young people have no respect. When I talk, you obey." His hand shot out, grabbing her arm tightly. The pressure made her wince. "Chike, stop!" her mother cried from the kitchen, her voice breaking. "She's tired. Please let her be." But he didn't seem to hear her. His pride was louder than any plea. Liana tried to pull away, tears forming in her eyes. "Dad, you're hurting me," she whispered. That only seemed to fuel his fury. He yanked her again, shouting about how she was becoming spoiled, how she thought she was grown. And then it happened. In one quick, terrible moment, his hand shoved her hard. Liana's feet slipped. The world spun. Her body hit the stairs with a dull, cracking sound. Once, twice again. The sound echoed through the silent house. Then everything went still. "Liana!" Ngozi screamed, dropping the bowl she was holding. She ran to her daughter, who was lying at the bottom of the staircase, gasping weakly, her eyes wide with shock. Her wrist bent awkwardly, her head bleeding slightly where it had hit the step. "Liana, talk to me," her mother begged, kneeling beside her. Her trembling hands hovered, afraid to touch her too hard. "Please, my child, stay with me." Mr. Okoro stood frozen halfway down the stairs, his chest heaving. The rage in his face slowly melted into horror. He looked at his daughter, his only child, lying broken before him, and realization hit him like a wave. But instead of rushing forward, instead of helping, his pride spoke first. "She should have listened," he muttered quietly, almost to himself. "I told her." Ngozi looked up at him in disbelief, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Chike, look at what you've done," she screamed, her voice echoing through the house. But he didn't move. He couldn't. Shame and stubbornness rooted him to the spot. As Ngozi grabbed her phone with shaking hands to call for help, Liana's world blurred. The ceiling spun, her mother's voice faded into a distant echo, and the last thing she saw before everything went black was her father's shadow standing at the top of the stairs, silent, still, and far too late. The ambulance raced through the streets of Ibadan, sirens cutting through the night. Ngozi held her daughter's hand tightly, whispering prayers under her breath, her tears falling onto Liana's bruised face. "Please, God, please keep her alive," she repeated over and over, as if her words alone could hold Liana to this world. At the University College Hospital, doctors rushed her into emergency care. Nurses moved quickly, oxygen mask for drip x-ray. The room buzzed with urgency. Ngozi stood outside the curtain, helpless, clutching her bag like it was the only thing keeping her from collapsing. Hours passed before a doctor finally came out, his face serious but calm. "She's stable," he said. "A fractured wrist, some bruised ribs, and a mild concussion. She needs rest and care." Ngozi thanked him over and over, her voice shaking with relief. When she was finally allowed to see her daughter, Liana looked small and fragile in the hospital bed, her arm in a cast, bandages wrapped around her head. Her eyes fluttered open weakly, meeting her mother's. "Mama," she whispered. Ngozi leaned close, brushing her hair gently. "I'm here, my baby. You're safe now. Just rest." But safety was a strange word, because the one who had hurt her wasn't a stranger. It was her father. The same man who once taught her how to ride a bicycle, who told her to stand tall. 2 days passed. Not once did Mr. Okoro show up. Not a call, not a message. Only a distant relative came by with an envelope and a short message. Your father says he's sorry, but she must understand discipline. Ngozi couldn't even look at the messenger. She just placed the envelope on the table and turned back to her daughter. But Liana heard it. Every word. She stared at the ceiling, her eyes filling with silent tears. The pain in her body was nothing compared to what she felt inside. Her father had pushed her down the stairs, and now he was pushing her away again, hiding behind pride and excuses. In that moment, something inside her shifted. A wall went up. The love she had for him, the respect she'd once fought to keep, it cracked, just like her wrist. When she was finally able to sit up, the nurse smiled and said she'd be discharged soon. Liana nodded quietly, but her mind was already somewhere else. She looked out the window at the Ibadan skyline, the same city that had felt too small for her dreams. Now it felt like a place she needed to escape from completely. As she watched the sun rise over the rooftops, she made a silent promise to herself. When I walk out of this hospital, she whispered, I'll never walk back into that house again. And for the first time since the fall, she felt a small spark of strength returning, fragile, but real. After a few weeks in the hospital, Liana finally recovered enough to leave. Her mother helped her pack, quietly slipping some money into her bag. Go to your Aunt Grace in Lagos, she whispered. You'll be safe there. Liana hesitated. Part of her wanted to stay close to her mother, but she knew if she stayed, her father's shadow would swallow her again. So, she left Ibadan without saying goodbye to him. Grace Okoro was nothing like her brother. A widowed businesswoman in Lagos, she ran a small catering and fashion business, confident and kind, but with a firmness that came from surviving her own storm. When Liana arrived, she opened the door wide, pulling her into a long hug. You don't have to explain anything, she said softly. I know your father's pride, but don't let his anger become your story. For the first time in months, Liana slept peacefully. No shouting, no orders, just quiet. Grace gave her a small room with a desk and a view of the busy Lagos streets below. This is your new beginning, she said, handing Liana a cup of hot tea. Liana soon found a part-time job as a teaching assistant at a neighborhood school. The pay was small, but it covered her meals and a bit of savings. Every evening after work, she sat at her laptop, an old one her aunt gave her, taking online tech courses, teaching herself coding, design, and business skills. Sometimes she stayed up until 2 a.m., her face lit by the screen, her wrist still aching from the fall but her heart stronger than ever. One day, she told herself, I'll build something that matters. Her father never called. Not once. The silence that used to hurt her now felt like freedom. Each day that passed without his voice controlling her felt like a piece of her spirit coming back. Grace noticed the change too. You've got that fire in your eyes, she teased one night, watching Liana type furiously. Keep going. Don't stop just because the world told you to be small. Liana smiled. I won't, she said quietly. And she meant it. Life in Lagos wasn't easy. The noise, the long commutes, the endless power cuts. But it was hers. She was building herself from scratch, one late night, one idea, one dream at a time. Months passed, and that spark inside her grew stronger. The girl who once fell down the stairs was now climbing, step by step, toward something bigger. She didn't know exactly what her future would look like yet, but she knew one thing for sure. She would never be the same girl who let fear silence her again. 2 years passed, and the girl who once fell down the stairs had become someone completely new. Lagos had shaped Liana, taught her to survive, to dream, and to work harder than anyone else. Every night spent in front of her laptop finally began to pay off. Her coding skills improved, her confidence grew, and soon she was helping small businesses design websites and manage their online stores. Word started spreading. That young girl from Ibadan? She's a genius with tech. Then one morning, an email changed everything. It was an acceptance letter from a women's tech boot camp in Nairobi, a full scholarship. Liana couldn't believe it. She ran to her aunt, waving the letter in the air. Auntie Grace. I got in. Grace hugged her tightly, her eyes shining. I told you, my dear, when you walk away from pain, you make room for purpose. In Nairobi, Liana worked harder than ever. Surrounded by other women building apps and dreaming of innovation, she felt alive again. One night, while talking with a classmate who sold handmade jewelry, an idea struck her. What if there was a simple app that connected small African artisans directly with global buyers? No middlemen, no scams, just honest business. That idea became Tanda, her startup project. At first, it was just her and 2 friends working from a small rented apartment with unstable Wi-Fi and instant noodles for dinner. But they believed in it. They built, tested, failed, fixed, and kept going. Within a year, Tanda started gaining attention. Local artists signed up, international customers placed orders, and word spread fast. People began calling it Africa's Etsy. Liana was invited to tech events, podcasts, and interviews. Reporters loved her story, the young woman who had literally been pushed down but refused to stay down. Standing before cameras one afternoon at a tech conference in Nairobi, Liana smiled nervously as flashes lit up the room. "I built this," she said into the microphone, "for every dream that was told to wait." The audience erupted in applause. Her words went viral online within hours, shared, quoted, celebrated. Back in Ibadan, her mother saw the clip secretly on YouTube. Tears filled Ngozi's eyes as she watched her daughter speak with such confidence and grace. She whispered a quiet prayer of thanks, her heart swelling with pride and regret all at once. Her father, however, still didn't know. No one dared tell him yet, until one morning he unfolded the Nigerian Daily Post and froze. There it was in bold print. Young tech founder from Ibadan raises $2.5 million for startup. He stared at the photo, his daughter smiling, radiant, standing next to investors in Nairobi. The same girl he'd once called disobedient. The same girl he'd pushed away. For a long moment he said nothing. The paper trembled in his hands. The world now saw her strength, and for the first time, he finally saw what his anger had almost destroyed. The morning sun slipped through the curtains of the Okoro house in Ibadan. Mr. Okoro sat in his usual chair, reading the Nigerian Daily Post with his glasses low on his nose. Everything seemed normal, until his eyes landed on a headline that made his hands freeze. Young tech founder from Ibadan raises $2.5 million for startup. He blinked, thinking maybe he'd read it wrong. But there it was, her name, Liana Okoro, printed boldly beneath a smiling photo of his daughter, standing beside international investors in Nairobi. She looked confident, radiant, successful. For a long moment, the house was silent. Ngozi, busy in the kitchen, peeked at him from the doorway. "You saw it?" she asked softly. He didn't look up. His jaw tightened. "I saw. She's doing well," Ngozi said, trying to keep her voice steady. He folded the paper slowly, staring at the floor. "She could have done that from here," he muttered under his breath, his tone rough, but there was something else in his eyes. A flicker of guilt, a memory he couldn't erase. Ngozi sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. "Maybe she needed to leave to become who she is," she said gently. But he didn't answer. He just sat there, the silence thick between them. By afternoon, word had spread through the neighborhood. Neighbors stopped by, smiling and congratulating him. "Chief Okoro, your daughter is famous now. Such a brilliant young woman," one of them said proudly. Mr. Okoro forced a smile, nodding stiffly. "Yes, she's doing well," he said, pretending pride. But inside, every compliment felt like a reminder of what he had lost, and why. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, he sat alone in the dimly lit living room. The newspaper lay open on the coffee table, her smiling face staring back at him. Slowly, he picked up his phone, scrolling through old photos. There she was, little Liana at 6, holding his hand on her first day of school. Another photo of her wearing his oversized military cap, laughing. And then, the last one before everything broke, her university send-off standing beside him, her smile nervous but hopeful. His throat tightened. He wanted to call her. He wanted to say I'm sorry, to tell her how proud he was, how much he missed her. But his pride, that same pride that had built walls in their home, held him back once again. He typed her number. His thumb hovered over the call button for a long time. Then he sighed and locked the screen. The house was quiet except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. Mr. Okoro leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on her photo glowing faintly from his phone. The daughter he had broken now stood taller than he ever imagined, and the father who had once felt powerful had never felt smaller. Months later, the air in Abuja buzzed with excitement. Banners hung across the grand conference hall, cameras flashed, and reporters whispered her name, Liana Okoro. The government was hosting a national tech summit to honor young innovators transforming Africa's future, and Liana was one of the headline guests. Her story had spread far beyond Nigeria. The girl who built a platform connecting artisans to the world, empowering women along. She had come home, not as a daughter returning in tears, but as a woman standing tall in her purpose. Dressed in a simple white suit and gold earrings her aunt had given her, she carried herself with quiet confidence. When she walked into the hall, people turned. She smiled politely, shaking hands, thanking everyone, her calm presence commanding respect. But among the crowd that day sat a man she didn't know was there, her father. Mr. Okoro had traveled from Ibadan quietly, wearing a plain shirt and cap, sitting at the very back row where no one would notice him. He didn't tell his wife or anyone he was coming. He just needed to see her, even from afar. When the announcer called her name, the room erupted with applause. Mr. Okoro looked up, and for a second his breath caught. There she was, his daughter, standing on a stage filled with government officials, CEOs, and journalists, the lights reflecting off her confident smile. The same girl he once called disrespectful was now being honored for empowering thousands of women. Liana stepped to the microphone, the noise fading to silence. Her voice was soft but steady. "Once," she began, "I was told that discipline meant silence, that respect meant obedience. But silence only grows pain. Today, I choose to speak, for every girl who's been told she's too stubborn to dream." The audience erupted again, clapping and cheering. Phones went up, recording her every word. Liana smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. She wasn't angry anymore, she was free. In the back row, Mr. Okoro lowered his head. Her words hit him like truth he could no longer deny. He remembered all the times he'd silenced her, all the moments he'd mistaken control for love. And now, sitting there, he realized the world celebrated the very strength he had tried to crush. As the crowd stood for a standing ovation, he clapped too, quietly, almost trembling. His eyes filled with tears he didn't wipe away. He wanted to run to her, to say something, but he stayed seated, afraid his presence would break her moment. Liana looked out over the audience, her gaze sweeping the hall. For a brief second, her eyes landed near the back. She thought she saw a familiar face. But she didn't linger. She simply smiled, lifted her chin, and finished her speech. Dreams don't need permission. They just need courage. The applause roared again, and Mr. Okoro, sitting alone, finally understood. The daughter he once pushed down had risen higher than he could ever reach. After the event, the crowd slowly began to fade away. Liana stayed backstage, still processing the moment. The flashing cameras, the cheering crowd, the warm handshakes. She had done it. She had spoken her truth on the same soil where her voice was once silent. As she took a deep breath, fixing her hair in the mirror, a soft voice called from behind. "Liana!" She froze. That voice, deep, familiar, and trembling, sent chills down her spine. She turned slowly. Standing a few steps away was her father, Mr. Okoro. For a moment, neither of them moved. The noise from the auditorium faded into a distant hum. Time itself seemed to stop. "Liana, my daughter," he said again, his voice cracking on the last word. He looked older than she remembered, his shoulders slumped, his eyes tired. He wasn't the loud, commanding man she had grown up fearing. He just looked human. Liana stood still, her throat tightening. Memories rushed back. The shouting, the bruises, the stares, the hospital. All the nights she cried into her pillow, wondering why her father's love had to hurt so much. She swallowed hard. "Why are you here?" she asked quietly. He took a step closer but stopped, his hands trembling slightly. "I came to see you," he said. "I needed to." Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed calm. "You saw enough the last time you looked at me, Dad." He lowered his head, guilt washing over his face. "I was wrong," he said slowly. "I thought I was teaching you respect, but I was teaching you fear." His words cracked with honesty, raw and heavy. "I see now that the strength I tried to break was the strength this whole country celebrates today." Liana's lips trembled. She wanted to believe him, to let that apology heal something inside her, but the pain was still too deep. "You can't undo what you pushed, Dad," she said softly, her eyes glistening. "But I've climbed higher than those stairs ever were." Her words hung in the air like truth carved in stone. Mr. Okoro's eyes filled with tears. He nodded slowly, unable to speak. "I know," he whispered, "and I thank God you did." For a moment, they just stood there, the silence thick with everything they'd never said. He looked at her one last time, pride and regret tangled in his expression, then turned to leave. As he walked away, Liana felt a strange mix of sadness and peace. She didn't run after him. She didn't need to. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, she realized. It meant understanding that she no longer needed his approval to stand tall. And in that quiet backstage corner, with her father's footsteps fading behind her, Liana finally felt free. Not because he said sorry, but because she no longer needed him to. Months turned into a year, and Liana's life took on a new kind of purpose. Her success had given her a platform, but instead of chasing more fame or money, she wanted to build something meaningful. She remembered what it felt like to be silenced, to be afraid in her own home, and she knew there were other girls out there living that same pain. So she started the Rise Foundation, a program for young women dealing with family abuse and pressure. It offered scholarships, therapy, tech training, and most importantly, a safe space to breathe and begin again. "We can't choose the families we're born into," she said at the launch event, "but we can choose to become the women they never believed we could be." The foundation grew fast. Donations came in, volunteers signed up, and every week, more girls found their way through the doors. Some came with bruises on their bodies, others with scars you couldn't see, but Liana welcomed them all. She listened to their stories, helped them find housing, jobs, and hope. For the first time in her life, her pain had become her purpose. One sunny afternoon, as she walked into one of the foundation's learning centers in Ibadan, something unexpected caught her eye. Near the back of the room, an older man was helping a teenage girl fix her broken laptop. He was wearing a plain shirt, his sleeves rolled up, his head slightly bent as he worked carefully with a screwdriver. It was her father, Mr. Okoro. He didn't see her walk in. He just kept working quietly, guiding the girl with patience. "Try pressing this key now," he said softly, smiling a little when the screen flickered back to life. The girl beamed, saying, "Thank you, sir." He nodded, standing up slowly, his movements showing his age. On the table beside him were neatly stacked chairs and boxes of supplies, things he'd clearly been organized. Liana stood there silently, frozen for a moment. Her first instinct was to walk away, to protect her heart. But something stopped her. She just watched. He wasn't there to talk. He wasn't there to win forgiveness. He was just showing up, quietly, humbly, doing small things that didn't need attention. Grace, who now helped run the foundation, walked over and whispered, "He's been coming for weeks. Never asks for credit. Just helps wherever he can." Liana nodded, her eyes misty but calm. She didn't approach him. She didn't need to. Watching him bend down to pick up another chair, she realized something deep inside her had changed. For the first time, she didn't feel anger or hurt when she saw him. She felt peace. Her father hadn't asked to be forgiven, but through his quiet actions, he was slowly learning what love truly meant. And in that quiet moment, Liana understood. Healing doesn't always happen in words. Sometimes it happens in silence, in simply showing up. A year later, Liana sat under the bright studio lights of a live TV interview. Cameras, microphones, and a sea of curious faces surrounded her, but she looked calm, glowing with quiet confidence. The host leaned forward and asked the question everyone wanted to know. "What made you start all this, Liana? What inspired you to build a foundation that's changing so many lives?" Liana smiled gently, her eyes thoughtful. She paused for a moment, as if replaying her entire journey in her mind. The fear, the pain, the fall, the climb back up. Then she said softly, "Because I once fell down the stairs and decided I'd never stay down again." The audience went silent. It wasn't just a statement, it was a heartbeat, a truth. Those words carried the weight of every bruise, every tear, every night she had doubted herself. The camera panned across the crowd. In the front row sat her mother and father, side by side. For the first time in years, their hands were clasped together. Her father's eyes glistened with tears he didn't bother to hide. He leaned slightly toward his wife and whispered, voice trembling, "That's my daughter." Up on stage, Liana continued, her voice steady and warm. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting," she said. "It means freeing yourself from what tried to break you. It means standing taller, even when the world expected you to stay small." The host nodded, speechless. The audience erupted in applause, loud, emotional, unstoppable. As the lights brightened and the cameras zoomed in, Liana stood there smiling, her heart finally at peace. She was no longer the girl who fell. She was the woman who rose higher than her pain and proved that resilience always wins.